It's a good evening, everybody, and welcome to all our viewers on Facebook Live. This is the first class of 4 classes introducing the idea of Mussar. What is Mussar? And from translating the word of Mussar, all the way to understanding how we use this as a tool to become a better person. So let's begin. I just want to begin myself as a grandchild of a leading Mussar master. Rabbi Wolbe is my grandfather of blessed memory. He passed away in 2005 at the age of 91. He was born in Berlin and grew up in a non-observant home. Was always intrigued and interested in more observance. The story goes that he was walking with his father, who was a professor, very high-profile professor. They were walking in one of the streets of Berlin, and his father met a rabbi. He wasn't very fond of rabbis, but he met a rabbi who introduced himself and told him, they got into a whole conversation, and they started talking about what degree the rabbi had and what degree the father had, and they shared many of the same interests. He was very intrigued, and this rabbi eventually persuaded the father to allow my grandfather, my great-grandfather, sending my grandfather to a sort of Jewish day school in Frankfurt later on. My grandfather always had a relationship with God. It was one of his natural traits, as we'll see when we talk about Mussar, that everyone has a natural trait which they're very, very strong in. They have one perfect trait. My grandfather's perfect trait was emunah, which is faith. And that emunah drew him closer to his faith at a very, very young age. We were told as children that I think for one of his birthday gifts, he asked for a podium, and he would lecture to. My grandfather was an only child, the son of an only child, So he didn't really have any relatives, but from his mother's side, he had one first cousin, and she would sit with his mother together, and he would lecture to them, about the parsha and things like that. At a young age, he also went to the local synagogue and gave classes there on Shabbos after he finished school. So he went to this gymnasium in Frankfurt at the age of 13. Then he went to Switzerland, where he learned in a yeshiva. And then I think it was one of his last weeks, one of the agreements that his parents allowed him to go to this yeshiva was that when he comes back, he's going to university. And that's it. This nonsense of going to yeshiva is all over. So the last week he was there, he heard his first Mussar lecture. It was so life-changing for him to hear this lecture. He immediately after the lecture ran over to the rabbi who was giving this discourse, and he says, he's asking him all these questions, and the rabbi says, listen, you need to go to learn the Mir Yeshiva in Poland. You need to go to learn the Mir Yeshiva in Poland by Rabbi Rucham. You'll hear that name a lot. And that's my grandfather's rabbi. So my grandfather had an agreement, but he wanted to change that agreement. So he wrote a letter to his parents. His parents at that time were on a cruise to Italy. And on the cruise, they met a fortune teller. And the fortune teller is talking to them. He says, you have a son. Whenever you arrive at your destination, you're going to receive a letter from him. In that letter, he's going to ask for something very, very odd. Whatever he wants, let him do it. And in that letter, he asked to go learn in the Mir Yeshiva. And they let him do it. And my grandfather would say that his life began when he stepped into the door of the Mir Yeshiva. Now, they would ask in the yeshiva, he said, that they would always ask, each other, like when a new student came, like they would ask, how old are you? 17, 18, 19, and they would all laugh. He's 19 years old. And what's so funny? Well, he's 18 months old, and he's 4 months old, and he's 6 years old. What do you mean? Well, that's when they came to the yeshiva. And they felt it was such a life-changing place. It was a place where you came and changed your life. It had such a powerful impact that's what they felt, that their spiritual birth was in that yeshiva. And what was so great about the yeshiva that they felt that this was the beginning of their life? We'll see that. We'll talk about that a lot. One of the incredible stories told about Rabbi Yerucham, my grandfather's rabbi, was that my grandfather arrived, I think it was on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, he arrived at the yeshiva, and he met the rabbi, the head of the yeshiva, Rabbi Yerucham, and he introduced himself, and the students came and offered him, they greeted him. This was such a special place, because it was a place of education of character. And the way they learned to greet people wasn't just like, oh, hi. There wasn't what, it was such an excitement to see someone, to meet them as a new person. And he felt like, I don't know, I don't think I knew this person before, right? He makes it as if we're best friends. It's like the first time we met him. And then the next guy comes out and he greets him exactly the same way. You realize this is a place where they had a genuine joy to meeting people, to saying hello, to humanity, to appreciating the value of a human being. So, Friday night, Shabbos, Kabbalat Shabbat, in the yeshiva, my grandfather is sitting in his usual seat for the past 3 days, and he looks at the place of Rabbi Yerucham, where Rabbi Yerucham is saying, someone else is sitting in his seat. So he says to someone, we should tell that person that he should move out of, this is Rabbi Yerucham's seat, this is the head of the yeshiva, someone shouldn't be sitting in his seat. They said, no, that's Rabbi Yerucham. So what are you talking about? Now, he wasn't a lunatic, my grandfather, right? He was a very sane, normal person. Where he didn't see that it was Rabbi Yerucham. He had a glow on Shabbos that was so, he just beamed. He was a totally different person. He had a glow. My grandfather couldn't recognize him. This is the same person you saw on Wednesday, and on Thursday, and on Friday. On Shabbos, couldn't recognize him. He just had this glow. That was the Mir Yeshiva. So, in the outbreak of World War II, my grandfather got a note from the Polish government that he had to leave Poland, and he went to Sweden, where he lived for 8 years. Now, I don't know if you know, but many, many, many people who came to Sweden as very observant Jews assimilated with the Swedish people. Many of them lost all connection to their faith. And yet my grandfather found this place that he had to be in, because he couldn't go to Germany. He went to neutral Sweden. And for him, my grandfather said the greatest growth of his life was in Sweden. Why? See, many times we rely on our environment to be the place of our growth. To be the source of our growth, to be the engine of our growth. And here, my grandfather had to make that engine inside him. We can grow from outside. We can also get hurt from outside. But the greatest way to grow is to grow from inside. And when you can have that energy to grow and to strengthen yourself and to become a holier person through your inside, that means that your relationship with a higher power, being the Almighty, is very, very strong. That's really the essence of Mussar, and we'll get into it. We'll get into many practical examples. My grandfather, the first day he arrived there, opened up what was later known as the Beis HaMussar. The Beis HaMussar means the house of Mussar. And he had on his door of his apartment right? He had the Beis HaMussar. This is the house of Mussar. What was the purpose of the house of Mussar? This is a place that he was able to sit and to study Mussar, have time to contemplate, have introspection, without any interruptions. It's a very, very powerful thing. People don't do that. You know, just as a side note, see these devices that we have, right? These cell phones. Do you know, research study shows that people look at their cell phones 1,000 times a day. We don't have time to think about ourselves today. Because even when we put it down, we get a little buzz. What is it? Did I get another message? Did I get another, right? What's going on in the world? Is there news? Is there someone, right? Someone collapsing someplace? Right? We're in a world where to shut off the world for just 5 minutes is such a big task. Now, then it wasn't less difficult. It wasn't less difficult. But the same power, the same struggle to overcome all of those disturbances and to focus was there then. And the only way to do it was to assign a room, a place where there you have nothing. Just a chair and a table where you can contemplate, where you can sit and think. Think of it. Think if you had a place in your home, right, where you can do that. Suddenly you grab a book, or you have the television playing in the background, you have the radio on, right? You have the children running here, you have right? So there's always something. Where do we have a place of complete solitude? Just no interruptions, no disturbances. It's very rare to find such a place in a normal home. But that time gave him the ability to give himself direction. Where do I want to go? What do I want to be? And we'll see much more about this soon. He arrived in Israel to marry my grandmother. My grandfather, one of the great things that he accomplished in Sweden, aside for making a tremendous individual out of himself, was that he opened up a seminary for girls. What happened was there were many girls who were being sent from the holding camps, and they were sending them to Sweden. Sweden had a shortage of women, so they were sending them. A lot of those girls were Jewish girls. So my grandfather heard about this, so he got on a train, traveled many, many hours to find where that place was that all of these refugees were arriving. And they were in an auditorium full of girls. And he came there with a sandwich, and he washed his hands. Everyone was having their lunch. He washed his hands to make the blessing of Al Netilat Yadayim. And the girls were in awe. And he took his bread and made the blessing of Hamotzi Lechem in Haaretz, and the girls started crying. Because for 5 years they were in the concentration camps. And they haven't seen such a thing. In 5 years, they've never seen their fathers. They were separated from their family. They thought their Judaism is over. And here we see a rabbi sitting here. He was a young man. He was 28 years old or so, or 29. And immediately he said, we need to do something about this. There are hundreds of girls here. We have to find a place to put them. So he decided he's going back to Copenhagen, where and on the way he stopped, took a train. He got off the train, called them, the rabbis there, and said, get ready, we're having a meeting as soon as I arrive, because there's a major crisis we need to handle. And they immediately put together a task force. They sent a letter to the Swedish government that they need a place for all of these refugees. They need a building. How long would it generally take a government office to respond?
Time.
Months? Years? 2 days later, they had a building. 2 days later, they had a building, and they were able to start their school for these girls. And the place was called Lidingo. Lidingo. There's a book called Lidingo. My grandmother later wrote a book also that has a lot of the details of that. My grandmother was one of the teachers in that school. And apparently they met. and
What year was that?
I wouldn't know. 1945 or 46. Now it was amazing that my grandfather was there as well, because he was in a neutral country, so when they needed to pay for visas to get people out of, one of the war-stricken countries, so people from the United States would send money to Sweden. My grandfather would be able to purchase those visas and send it off. He was in a neutral country there. He was able to, and hundreds, if not thousands, of people's lives were saved because he was able to get those visas from where he was. Okay. So shortly after they got married, my grandparents got married in Israel. Now it's very interesting. This is an interesting side note. I don't know, it's going on Facebook, but everyone will forgive me, right? Who's this guy from Berlin? My grandmother, okay, so that's my grandfather, right? My grandmother came from a very prestigious family. Her father was the head of the yeshiva in Slobodka in Lithuania. Very, very prestigious family. Her grandfather was the head of the yeshiva as well, Reb Dovzi Heller. And, she came from a family of, tremendous lineage. And here she wants to marry this guy. It's like a no-brand name. No one's ever heard of it, right? Some German boy, right? Who she fell in love with. I don't know if they fell in love yet, but she got to know. And either way, there were many rabbis who were opposed to this shidduch, to this union. They were not happy about it. Many said they don't want to come to the wedding. Who's this guy? Who's this, she comes from a dynasty, and who's this guy? And with the encouragement of many of the sages, and with the encouragement of her brother-in-law, Rabbi Chaim Kreiswith, who was the chief rabbi of Antwerp, they got married. And my grandfather developed a very close relationship with one of the leading rabbis in Israel at the time, the Chazon Ish. I said a couple of stories of that on Sunday, I believe. And at the Sunday class at Brit Shalom at 11 o'clock. You have to, right? So the Chazon Ish was very, very instrumental in my grandfather moving to the city of Ber Yaakov, or the village of Ber Yaakov, where he later started a yeshiva, which became the yeshiva which became an incredible place of growth. I think my grandfather's vision for his yeshiva, the Ber Yaakov yeshiva, was the same as the Mir yeshiva in Poland. He wanted it to be a university of human beings, a university of character, a university of growth. You see, we have subjects. We can learn math, we can learn science, we can learn medicine, right? We can learn law. There are many things we can learn. But that's wisdom. But is there something we can learn that changes who we are? You see, you can go to school to become a mathematician or an engineer, and you have a strong ability to get angry. Right? It's one of your tendencies. You have a tendency to get angry. When you leave engineering school, is your tendency going to leave you? No, it's going to be exactly where it was. You just have more wisdom, but the tendency is going to stay exactly where it was. That's what this school was about. It was a school where you come, you learn a lot of things, a lot of wisdom, but you're going to leave a different person. The anger is going to be, if not completely removed, but it will be on a much smaller scale. And we'll see that. I'm going to give you some sheets and we're going to have some worksheets. We'll do that after we turn off the Facebook Live, so you'll have some time to mark it down. All right? So for over, I believe it was 40 years, hundreds or maybe thousands of students went through that yeshiva, which became the beacon of Mussar in the land of Israel, and most of whom have become very accomplished scholars, educators, and follow his teachings. If you read any of the religious media, which talk about education, parenting, marriage, relationships, 9 out of 10 articles will have a quote from my grandfather, from one of his writings, from one of his teachings, from one of his lectures. He had fundamental teachings about character, about a human being, about the strengths of a human being, the capability, and deeply rooted in his understanding. And here's a big mistake that people make. People say he went to university and he had a degree in psychology. It's not true. Did not have a degree in psychology, and he did not go to university. He did go for a few semesters when he was between yeshiva and yeshiva. He had a few semesters that he went and he learned some psychology, but it was not a degree and he wasn't a certified psychologist. Although he recommended that people go to psychologists when they needed it very strongly, but he did not have such a degree. But he understood the human psyche. He understood the nature. I'll tell you one quick story. So I don't know if you're familiar with religious people in Israel, but religious people in Israel are busy with one thing: the study of Torah. Anything but the study of Torah is frowned upon, unless now it's becoming a lot more different, where people, where people are getting educated so that they can be in the workforce, and that not everyone is cut out for learning in yeshiva. But at least when this question was asked, at least 20 years ago, that was the norm. I had people who went to work. It was. Today it's much more common. Today, 2016, it's very common. Guy is in yeshiva. He's not producing the way he should. They'll send him out to go work, and it's not frowned upon, and it's encouraged in most circles. So, what's about sports? What's about sports? Sports is not very common for a typical yeshiva student. All right? Let's put it that way. So, one rabbi, and I heard this from the rabbi himself, asked my grandfather the following question. He said his son was then 12 or 13 years old, and he really, really wants to go play soccer. He really wants to go play soccer. Should I or should I not allow him to play soccer for a half hour? On Fridays, when he's back from yeshiva, right? Should I allow him to play soccer on Fridays? What do you think he would answer? He said, of course not. A half hour? Who could play soccer for only a half hour, right? And the rabbi was shocked. How in the world would an 80-year-old man know that a half hour of soccer is not enough? When you understand human beings, you understand that a half hour of soccer is not enough. Right? He was shocked. He thought he would say for sure not. Or he could play for the half hour. But to play more than you understand, to understand the human being. Okay. My grandfather also published many books on Mussar. The most famous is the 2-volume set called Aleishur, Aleishur, 2 words, and it's a 2-volume. It's in Hebrew. It'll probably always be in Hebrew. He did not want it to be translated, but it became his most famous work. It took my grandfather 15 years. It took him 15 years to write the first one, and 15 years to write the first, and 13 years to write the second. The second is almost double the size of the first. An interesting side note on that is that my father, in the 80s, they started having word processors. You don't have to type everything on a typewriter. You can word process, you can copy, you can paste, and do all these things. It's much easier. So my father asked my grandfather, "Do you want me to get you a word processor?" So he said, "For what?" He says, that way you can write, and you can edit what you write, and you can change, and you can move it here and move it there, and you can make all these adjustments. He said he's never needed to change one thing he wrote in his book. my father used to sleep. They had a two-bedroom apartment. My father had 3 older sisters who shared a bedroom, and himself, who slept in the living room, dining room, kitchen, all the same room, right? And in the morning, and study, right? So it was all this one room. And his younger brother was 5 years younger than him, so they shared that same bedroom. Either way, my father would wake up every morning to the sound of a typewriter. And my father would always tell us that he would hear, it'd be sporadic. My grandfather would sit and think. Sometimes it'd be 10, 15 minutes of total silence. Total silence. And then a barrage of typing. Type, and then silence. Again, thinking, using his mind, using his understanding, his intellectual strength. Again, but these are not books of ideas, concepts, or a result of research. Many people write books, and they do several months of research, and they take off, and these books are really an autobiography. These books are my grandfather writing about his spiritual journey. It's not presented that way, but he's giving. It's imagine the following thing: you climb up a mountain, and you have 2 different ways, 2 different people who can help you with your path, with your trail. One who actually went up the mountain, he came back down and told you, this is how you go right up there, you make a left, you make a right, you go there, you turn, when you see this landmark, you make a turn over there, go up right. Or you have someone who says, look, I looked at the map, I'm telling you I think this is the way you should go. Which would you trust more?
The guy that went there.
The guy that actually went through it, he lived through it. That's the way my grandfather wrote the book. He didn't write any suggestions. He didn't write concepts or ideas. I did this. This is my work. I'm sharing it with the world.
Curious, how was he twice as productive in the second book than the first book? It seemed like he wrote twice as much.
Right. So the second book is based on a lot of his discourses. So I think it was easier for him to transcribe it or put those ideas into words. Then the beginning was a completely brand new. It was a shock to the world of Torah Judaism that there can be such a lofty book written by a person in our generation. Wow. My grandfather, everybody who's learned them, and I'll be happy to. We're going to do a lot of the materials from that in upcoming classes, but it's the fundamentals in number 1. Number 2 is practical application. He says, don't jump to number 2 before you have number 1,
Right.
because it doesn't work. Okay. You can only lead someone through a maze that you've gone through yourself. Do as I say, not as I do doesn't work. Right? He was methodical and he was thorough, and everything was tested. Everything was tested by his life experience. Right? Okay. So let's understand what is Mussar. But before we talk about Mussar, we need to talk about a word that you'll hear a lot of. It's called midot. Midot is a plural for the word midah. Midah in English means measurement, loosely translated as character trait. Right? I'm going to give you a list now of 14 randomly selected positive traits and 14 randomly selected negative traits. So you understand what I'm talking about. You'll each here, you know what, I'll pass this out. Don't do this worksheet, please, yet. But, and here's 3 more. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to give you these 14. You ready? Zrizut, alacrity. Hakarat hatov, appreciation. noseh be'ol, caring, nikiyut, cleanliness, emunah, faith, nidivut, generosity, simcha, happiness, anavah, humility, chesed, kindness, ohev, loving, seder, order, savlanut, patience, emet, truth, and ratzon, will. These are 14 positive traits. Then we have 14 negative traits here. Achzariyut, aggression, kaas, anger, ga'ava, arrogance, sheker, dishonesty, kin'ah, envy or jealousy, chanufa, flattery, sinah, hatred, atzlut, laziness, ta'ava, lust, atzvut, sadness, anochiyut, selfishness, kamtzanut, stinginess, akshanut, stubbornness, and da'aga, worry. Now I'm sure when I'm reading through this list, you're thinking to yourself, yikes, right? There's a lot of work to be done, right? These are all, and it's what's interesting is I have a list that I can share with you. Probably be best if I share it by email, and you can email me, and I'll happily share it with you.
Did you do this, or did someone else do it?
I did this, but there's a list here that I did not create, which is a list from Rabbi Zelik Pliskin's book, Begin Again Now, which is a list of 221 positive traits and 330 negative traits. Right? I have the book. I have a copy here of many. I added a few. I took out a few, but it's all based on the list from Rabbi Zelik Pliskin's book, Begin Again Now. We have in each of us a gold mine of positive traits and perhaps a coal mine of negative traits. But we all have positive and negative traits. And we're going to, the goal of this Mussar series is to really delve into each one of those traits. We're going to give it a 1 week per trait. If we see we need more time, we'll do maybe 2 weeks per trait. But to really investigate what the trait is, because when we read any of those traits, let's see, savlanut, patience, what comes to mind? What comes to mind?
If I'm not calmness, patience, being calm.
All right. What do you think, Becky?
Tolerance.
Tolerance. Doc,
I think the opposite.
what do you think, patience?
Not patient.
What do you think it means?
So that's what it means, what we think.
To be considerate, right? What you think?
Waiting and let things come to you.
Gary, what do you think?
About.
What do you think the word savlanut, or the trait of savlanut, patience, means? Well, what's going to happen is you'll see that every single trait that we talk about, everyone's going to have a different connection to that trait. Right, we talk about envy or jealousy. Well, everybody has a different scale of jealousy. Everyone has a different understanding of what jealousy is. Everyone has a different experience with jealousy. So yeah, while I might have one definition that I connect with, right, you may have a different understanding to what that means when we talk about jealousy. It's just a trait. We have many, many, many traits in every single one of within us. All right, and we're going to get into this. We're going to work through it systematically. But at least we know a trait is in Hebrew midah. Right? We'll talk plural about midot. That's traits. Okay, midah and midot are traits, character traits. Now, midah also, we said, means a measurement in the literal translation. A measurement, the reason why it's called a measurement, imagine if you walked into a lab. You walk into a lab and you see, they have those goggles, right? They have the goggles on, and they're spilling the red with the blue, with the yellow, with the purple, with all these different colors, right? You say, like, what? Just put them all together. What's the big deal? No. It's very complicated. You have to understand. This is, one consistency, and there's another consistency, there's another consistency. You can't mix them up because it'll have certain reactions. But everyone is a different quantity, right? Walking into a lab, think of that idea of all these different measurements. That's us. We are a lab of self-perfection. Everybody's got a different structure. Everybody has different traits that they're stronger at, that they're weaker at, and you're going to have a chance to fill out that form for yourself, by the way. It's all private, right? It's very personal, because no one likes to feel like they're not perfect, like we established already Sunday.
Right.
Well, I'm perfect. No. Guess what? I hate to break it to you. Gary, I love you. Not perfect.
I'm sorry, my middle name is Chernobyl.
Okay. So none of us are perfect, but each of us have incredible qualities that if we use them right will help correct our negative traits. Right? We all have a composition that is unique and special to us, which is what makes every single human being in the entire world different. You ever realize that there are no two people in the world that look alike? How many people? 6 billion people in the world? They can look similar, but not exact. You know why? Talmud tells us, "Kishem shupartzufeim shonim, kach deoteim shonim." Just like their faces are different, their opinions are different, their understandings are different, their characteristics are different. Everything about them is different. And even when you have two siblings, and everyone says, "Oh, well, I know people who are identical twins," yeah, and are completely different. They don't like the same colors. They don't like the same. This one thinks that it's a great thrill to go on a roller coaster. This one doesn't want to get even in an amusement park, right? This one thinks that reading books is great, and this one thinks reading music is great, right? And they don't. I've met many identical twins, or even non-identical twins. Very, very different, uniquely different. They grew up in the same home, sharing the same room, most of the times dressed the exact same way, and yet lead completely different lives. Because we're all different. God created us all unique and all special. Every single one of us are special and unique in our own way. And that's what we're going to try to find. We're going to try to find out, not, what are all my negative traits? How am I going to beat myself up now? Tell me what else I need to fix in myself. No. What we're going to try to do is find all the ways that we're unique and special, and how we can bring those fantastic qualities to shine much more than they already do. So if I'm a person of let's again take that list. If I'm a person of kindness, how do I bring that kindness to a whole new level? If I'm a person of happiness, how do I shine with that happiness wherever I go? If I'm a loving person, naturally, how do I become more loving? In all situations, not only with people I know, not only with people I'm comfortable with. And we'll get into the definitions of each one of them. Now, with every week that we work on a trait, I'm going to give out a sheet, which is going to be a Midah worksheet, which is going to have a couple of things in it. First, of course, your name. You can title the class however you want to title it, with the name of the Midah, of that trait. And then you're going to define that trait. We're going to work on it together. We're going to define the trait. We're going to bring sources from our sages. And we're going to work on defining it first. Now, once you define it, you understand very clearly what that trait means, you're going to mark yourself where you think you're holding in that trait. Then you'll mark down, what do you think you can accomplish by working on this trait? If it's in the case of patients, that when I go to the bank, when I'm thirsty and I'm waiting on line, or I'm hungry and the person cuts in front of me, I'm not going to yell and make a whole thing. I'm going to be a little bit more patient. I'm going to understand their situation. I'm going to understand where they're coming from. Perhaps they're in an emergency. Perhaps they're going to figure out ways. We're going to give tools. What tools do I currently possess that can be immediately employed to help me effect a small measure of change in this trait? That's going to be the next thing. And then to actually accept upon yourself a challenge. A challenge that you're going to work on for that entire week, every day, to work on fixing it or elevating yourself in that trait. And then there'll be page number 2, which will have your ability to journal every day your successes and or failures in working on that trait. All right, so that is regarding the Midah worksheet. Now, my grandfather has in his book an incredible, I printed a copy so you'll get it at the end of class. He created this concept where it's not enough to just work on your traits. You have to know what is your primary trait, your primary positive trait, and your primary negative trait, right? What does that mean? Okay, so first let's take a few steps back and we'll get to that in a second. Where do our traits come from? Where do our traits come from?
Some from
Upbringing.
some from genetics.
Okay. Anybody else?
Your environment.
Your environment. Okay.
Some we're born with.
Right. Okay. So the truth is, everyone is right. All of our traits we get when we're born. We get all of our traits, our positive and our negative traits. We get them. It's the file that's embedded into our soul. Where do we see this? We see this in Genesis, chapter 2, verse number 7. Vayipach be'apav nishmat chayim, vayihi ha'adam l'nefesh chaya. And God blew into the nostrils of man a living soul, and he became a living being. Sages explain, what is Adam? Adam is man. But where does the word come from, Adam? So the easiest association that people make with Adam is Adama. We come from the earth. We come from, right? We come from the earth. Kimina Adama lukacha. Right? God took Adam from earth and formed him and then infused him with a soul. There's another word for Adam, which is Adameh. I will be God-like. I will emulate God. So the same letters, Aleph, Daled, Mem, Adam, are the words of Adameh. I will be God-like. I will be similar or emulate or close to as much as I can to God. So what is it that God has? You know, we're soon going to be standing on Yom Kippur. We're going to be standing and praying. One of the things that we're going to say are the 13 attributes of mercy. The 13 attributes of mercy. Why do we say those attributes of mercy? These are the attributes of God. We have attributes, imperfect. God has attributes, perfect. Why? Because God is perfect. We're not. Because we're not God. Now it's, you know, God doesn't have a form. God isn't an image. God isn't the sun or the moon. God isn't a table or a chair. God is everything. Right? God is perfection. God blew into the nostrils of man a living soul. Say our sages. The soul is the traits. The traits that, but we can't have all of God, right? God doesn't have pieces either, by the way, right? God doesn't give us a piece of him, right? But you blow, what, right? Right? Imagine you're blowing into a balloon, and you're blowing part of your essence, part of your traits, right, into that balloon. You blew everything in? No, you blew some of it. The traits that we have are God-given traits. God gives us those traits. But we don't have them in perfection. God has them in perfection. He has them in absolute perfection. We have only a partial flavor of each of those traits. Along with that, so That's what we say. Mahu rachu, ma'afataruchu, mahu chanun, afatachanun, mahu, right? Just as God is merciful, so we are merciful. Just as God is kind, we want to be, we emulate, we desire, we aspire to be kind. Just as God is all patient, so too we aspire to be patient like God. Everyone has a perfect midah. This is a very, very, very fundamental principle of all of Mussar. Every single one of us have a perfect trait. You know, the Mishnah in Avot, chapter 2, Ethics of Our Fathers, chapter 2, Mishnah 9, says that one of the great Tanaim, the Tanaic sages, says to his disciples, to his students, says, find the proper path that a man should go in. He's guiding them, saying, find your way, because everyone has their own unique way. We'll see what that means in 1 second now. So my grandfather created, that's why we're back to this. My grandfather created a diamond, right? I named it the My Traits Chart, right? And this diamond has a box on top and a box on bottom. As you see over here, it says, for those online, it's going to be reversed, because I don't know why the camera reverses everything. So I'm here on the right, and it's really on the left, and they're what they see. So either way, so they're going to read negative traits, and it's going to show up as something backwards, whatever it is, however you read it backwards, and positive traits. So the positive traits here, and the negative traits here. Your strongest positive trait on top, and your weakest negative trait on bottom. And this serves as a tool to perfect all of these, and hopefully correct all of these as well.
What did you say the squares, the top and the bottom?
This is your positive, your
Most
best,
positive?
the best trait. Now, have you ever been to a funeral? Unfortunately, we've been to a funeral. Many times you'll see at a funeral, they eulogize a person for a trait, an individual trait that you see a common thread by all of the people who eulogize. Right? He was a person of tremendous integrity. He was a person who had such humility. He was a person who had such kindness. Right? You always hear that one trait. That's the identifying trait. I hope that whoever that person was that passed away knew that in his lifetime. Sometimes it's when you're away from something, it's easier for you to see it. How do we get away from ourselves to be able to see what that trait is? What is that perfect trait? And get into a world of understanding that trait. That's going to be one of our tasks in the upcoming journey for the next, I don't know, however many years we're going to continue this. That till we're perfect, right? So after we pass away from this world, we are asked our name. If you look at the back of the Amidah, right before you take the 3 steps back, there's a place, insert the verse that reflects your name. You know what that is? Because your name starts with one letter and ends with one letter, and you say a verse that begins with that same letter as your name and ends with the same letter of your name. If you look at an Art Scroll Siddur, you'll see it, and they have in the back, they have all of the listings of all the different names, right? That start with the letter Aleph and end with the letter Mem, and start with the letter Aleph and ends with the letter Ayin, or the letters, whatever it is, right? With the letter, and it goes, and then you'll find your verse, and you insert that verse before you say Oseh Shalom B'Mamav, right? You insert that verse. Why? Because our sages tell us that when we pass away, our common memory disappears, which is our name. So how are we going to identify who we are? We have that verse. That verse inserted in the prayer is the way we're going to be able to catch our name. Our sages say something else as well. You know what your name means? Your traits. Your character. The essence of who you are. What is a name in general? We call, it's very interesting. prohibition. It's very, very seriously, it's spoken very harshly about by our sages, is to never give someone a nickname. You can't give someone a nickname. Why not? Because the name is your essence. And by giving you a different name is changing your essence. You ever see three people named David? They have similar-ish type of personalities, right? You see people named Michael or Michael, right? And it's, somewhat, the names have there's a lot of characteristics that come with names. But in every human being, we have character traits. We have tremendously powerful tools to change, to influence ourselves, to influence our world around us. That is our name. That is our essence of who we are. All right? Without Torah, our sages tell us in the Talmud, Eruvin 100b, without Torah we would learn traits from animals. If we didn't have the Torah, and we'll see, I'm going to give many examples of how we learn things from Abraham and we learn things from Isaac and from Jacob. Every one of the characters in the Torah are there to teach us about our character. We see, for example, Abraham. Abraham was the quintessential man of kindness. What did he say to his three guests? He says, here, sit by the tree, here's some water, I'll get you some bread. What did he end up giving them? He gave each one his own animal that he slaughtered for them. Why? Because each one he wanted to give them a special slice of tongue. All he said was give them bread and water. Right? A person who does true kindness says a little bit, but does a lot. Right? I'll give you some bread and water. He brings them steaks. He brings them everything, right? You can't imagine the feast that why? Because he loved to give. He was looking for an opportunity. It says he had 4 entrances to his house, to his tent. Why? So that he can find any people passing by, so he can bring them in, and so that he can feed them. I don't know. Many of us sit with our door open, looking for people passing by in the street. Hey, come eat some dinner with us, right? That someone who's at such a perfect level of kindness, right? But let's look where he got it from. He got it from God. God is the giving. We learn from God. God gives and gives and gives. Imagine the following scenario. Imagine the child walks over to you, and you give your child everything. You give him private schooling, a Jewish day school, right? You give him food. You give him a bed to sleep on with a blanket and a pillow. You give him a roof over his head. You give him toys. You give him everything. You say, sweetheart, can you please clean up your toys? He looks at you in your eyes and he says, Daddy, no! I'm not cleaning up the toys. You clean up the toys. How motivated would any of us be to punch him? No. But how motivated would any of us be to buy him another toy? Not very much. Not very much. Yet we see that, I don't know about all of you, but I can't really say that I follow every single word of God's commandments. You guys are righteous. I'm a simple guy. Right? God says not to speak Lashon Hara. Do I never speak Lashon Hara? I don't think so. I'm not perfect in that area. Not even close. Does God shut off the power? Shut off the electricity?
No.
Does he shut off giving? And guess what? Every single time, it's a desecration of God's name. Do I make a blessing every time I eat food? Does that mean he's not going to give me any more food? He keeps on giving and giving and giving. And we see that there are people throughout the history, we see this in the Torah, we see this in the prophets, that went against God intentionally. They went all out against God. They built a tower. You know what I'll do? Power off. Goodbye. No, it's not what God does. He continues to give and continues to give and continues to give. You know why? Because God is a giver. Because God is all kind. Okay, there comes a point where they've abused everything and it's all done. And God says, okay, now it's time for judgment. God is all justice. Right? He's all mercy, but he's also all kind. That's where Abraham learned it from. He says, one second. If I do something against God, God continues to give. Right? And he gives more, and he gives more, and he gives more, non-stop giving. Why? Because God is selfless. What is kindness? Being selfless. It's not about me. So I told the chariot I'll give them $10, I'm going to give them $100. You know why? Because $100 hurts and $10 doesn't. I'm going to go beyond what I'm comfortable with. Because God does beyond what he's comfortable with. He doesn't like when people spit him in the face. And yet he continues to give. And continues to give more and more and more and more. Right? We learned that from Abraham. We learned that from Abraham's source, the Almighty. Okay? So, the Talmud says that if we didn't have the Torah to learn all these traits from, where would we learn traits? We'd learn them from the animals. So let's go back to Genesis again. In Genesis it says that Adam gave names to all of the animals. What's the big deal? Right? I know the number 8 is octo, right? So if I see an animal with 8 legs, I'll call it an octopus. What's so complicated? Right? And if I see a cat, I'll name it a cat. C-A-T, it's easy. Cat, hat. Right? What's the problem? Just give it a name. No, there's a lot of focus on the way Adam gave them names. Why? Because Adam didn't just give names to animals. He had to look into their essence of who they are, what are their characteristics. And by that, he gave them a name. A name that defines its essence. I'll give you a few examples. Right? What's a dog? Man's best friend, which is, by the way, the biggest humiliation for humanity is to call a dog man's best friend. I'll explain in a second why. Not because I don't love dogs. I love dogs. Away from me. But I love dogs. Why is that a humiliating statement for humanity?
It's not a human.
Well, no, but it's our best friend. It could be our best friend, right? So let me tell you why. So what's the name of a dog in Hebrew? Kelev. Right? Kelev is a dog. So let's dissect that word for 1 second. It's beautiful. You're going to love this, okay? Kelev comes from the word either kilev, like a heart, or kol lev, all heart. So let me give you a following scenario. We know that men and women are different, right? Yeah, in what way?
Always.
Right. Good answer. Right? So men and women are very different in a different way, in the way they process information sometimes. Now, the majority of men work more intellectually, which is why when a woman says to her husband, if he's not trained well, if she complains about her job, what does he say? What does he say? Quit your job. I told you 100 times, quit your job. But that's not what she wants to hear. She wants you to feel her situation. She wants you to be there with her. We immediately, instinctively respond intellectually, quit the job, finished. You have a problem, leave it. Right? We're solution oriented. We're Mr. Fix-It. She wants to talk about it. Right? She wants to be understood about it. She's emotional about it. Right? Women aren't controlled by their emotions, but it plays a more significant role in the way they operate. Men, it's the opposite. It's the intellect, right? And sometimes men need to learn how to be more emotional. Women need to learn how to use more intellect. Not that they don't have it, but to use it more, not to be dominated by it. Okay? So, young couple gets married. And she's so excited her husband is coming home from work, first day. She's so excited. He had a rough day at work. People didn't congratulate him on his wedding. He saw Joe who didn't show up to the wedding. He saw, right? It was a miserable day at work. Comes home, his wife is all dressed up. She's all excited. Her husband is coming home, right? And he's like, please, I'm sorry. I know this is not nice. I need some time right now. Turns on his sports, reads the paper, right? An hour later, he's a little bit calm, he's relaxed, and he goes to say hello to his wife. What is the likelihood that tomorrow, the next day, she'll come back to greet him at the door?
0.
100%. She's not coming back. You know why? It was painful. And when it's painful, nobody likes to be in pain again. So I'm not going to do that again. Right? Anybody here have a dog? All right. You ever say to your dog, bad dog? Right? Because he jumped on your guest, or because he ran on the carpet and he made a mess, right? You ever did that? You ever said bad dog? I heard people scream at their dogs, bad dog. Right?
Sure.
What happens a few minutes later? It comes wagging its tail right back. Right? You know why? Because he's only controlled by his emotion. He's kol lev. He's all heart. He's all emotion. Yes, the dogs have intellect too. Just like human beings have intellect. But he's controlled just by his emotion. Right? Adam, when he was giving the name for an animal, he had to understand what the characteristic of that animal is. Gave it a name that represents its essence. The essence of a dog is its emotion, its heart. You push it away, give it a minute, comes back wagging its tail. It's not controlled by its intellect. It's a very important idea that we need to understand. Okay, so we're going to get into all of these things, but I'll give you another few examples. Where would we learn modesty from? Sages tell us you'd learn modesty from a cat. You know, I had a cat as growing up as a little child. I once came home from synagogue. Some weekday morning, the rabbi walks over to me after shul. He calls me over. He says, "You want a really cute kitten?" He says, "My cat just gave birth to 8 kittens." I said, "Sure, kitten." So I find the cutest kitten. I take it. I have held the cat maybe once before. I knew you're supposed to pinch, like get its neck, right? By the neck over there, you hold it, and I put it on my sleeve of my coat, and it grabs on like with its paws. It's terrified, right? With its claws, and I bring it home. My mother almost disowned me. Forget the cat, right? And eventually, my mother softened up to it, and it was a great cat. It was phenomenal. We learned a lot of great things from it. One of the things you learn from it is that it doesn't do its needs, right, in public. Right? You learn modesty from it. It finds a quiet area behind the bushes. It digs a little hole, does what it needs to do, covers it up, and walks away. Sages tell us we would learn it from a cat. That's where we learn modesty from. Right? As a certain dignity. It wouldn't do it in public. How is that in its name? Anybody know the name for a diaper in Hebrew? The diaper in Hebrew is the word chitul. Anybody know the name for a cat in Hebrew? Chatul. Right? Same letters, different vowels. Chatul, chitul. We learn modesty from a cat. And there are hundreds of other animals, hundreds of other character traits that we would learn from them. And we can spend a lot of time going into all of them. But we see that there is a fundamental teaching that lies beneath the surface when we're talking about character traits in the Torah. It's not right out there. They don't say, "Oh, Abraham was such a kind person and he gave." No, we see it in the actions. But now we have to point it out. What is that trait? Right? We see, Jacob. What is his trait? We see Isaac. What is his trait? We see Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah. We see all these phenomenal traits, and we're going to talk about them. So we're late. Okay, so we're going to stop here for today. And next week we're going to delve into what is Mussar specifically. We spoke about traits. We're going to talk about what Mussar is. We're going to give examples of how we apply it. We're going to talk about the first steps of Mussar, the questions that we need to ask ourselves in the process of Mussar growth. And then we're going to talk about the power of change in Mussar and the limitations of change and the dangers of change. All right? We'll get into all of that next week. Monday night, 7:30. Join us on Facebook Live. You can come to the live class at the Torch Center. And thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for listening. And